Welcome. My name is Cindy Weidman. I am the president and CEO of the Good Partnership, and it is truly a pleasure for me to have with us Emma Lewzey, who is the president of Blue Sky Philanthropy. For those who are on early, know that Emma was my very first fundraising friend back about 15 years ago, but she's been fundraising. That was my first fundraising gig. Emma's been doing this a little bit longer than I have. And we've really been a resource, I think, to each other throughout both of our journeys. And over the past couple years have both ended up consulting with small and mid-sized nonprofits. And her company, Blue Sky Philanthropy, is great. Emma is, I'm going to go so far as to say you're a very prolific thought leader and writer in this space. I pretty much share everything that comes off of Emma's blog because it's like, yes, putting words to what I think most people experience. So yeah, it's almost been a long overdue guest on our masterclass, but I'm really glad to have you, Emma, today to share your wisdom. And I love that you suggested we talk about mid-sized donations because I think a lot of people don't really think about that in small shops. So that is, so Emma's company, we've already got our first question, which is the name of your company, Blue Sky Philanthropy, right?
Yes, Blue Sky Philanthropy.
And from there, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about why mid-level giving is your topic of interest right now?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I, have worked with a range of size of organizations over the years, from very small to very large shops. And I've found no matter what size of shop I've been in or, what level of experience of fundraising these shops have, is that mid-level donors are often overlooked. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity. So I'll say, just for folks who are really new to fundraising, mid-level giving is typically those donors who fall between the smaller gifts that you might get on some of your direct marketing channels. So say your smaller online gifts that may come through mail, gifts of like $25, $50, $75. So there are folks that fall between those smaller gifts that come in through what we sometimes call annual giving and what we would typically call major gifts, which can be, very large depending upon the size of your shop. But, typically those gifts are ones that you spend a lot more face-to-face time with your donors. You may want to ask for the gift in person. And I often describe mid-level giving as if, your direct marketing program and your major giving program had a baby, it would be mid-level giving, partially because great mid-level giving programs combine aspects of both ways of fundraising. So I can get into a little bit more about that, but I think I'm particularly interested in it because it's such a missed opportunity. It's a missed opportunity at a variety of sizes of shops, and it's also an opportunity that small shops are particularly well positioned to take advantage of. But I can stop there and see if you have other questions. You can sort of keep going at great length. So
well, I would say, I totally agree. And even more so, a trend when we start talking to organizations, and the question I get asked a lot is, where do we find donors? Where do we find major gift donors? And people kind of think that they materialize out of the abyss.
Yeah.
But this is really your pipeline, right? This is where you're going to find those major gift donors. So.
Absolutely. And that's so common that folks look outside of the organization for major gift prospects, who I call the usual suspects, all the really big donors you see giving to hospitals and universities. But there are gems in your smaller shop in your smaller shop donor base that are being overlooked, that have the capacity to make a significant gift. So yeah, I see mid-level 100% as a really important part of building your pipeline. We can talk a bit sort of more about the specifics of that a little later too, that I can get into, but definitely a really important part of building, of building that sort of flow of donors, where you're ultimately, where possible, upgrading folks from giving a smaller annual gift to a mid-level gift, and to like areas of greater engagement, again, very much depending upon the donor and the donor's needs and the donor's wants, but just giving donors that opportunity to increase their commitment to your organization.
Yeah. Now, we've had this conversation also around major gifts, which is what it constitutes a major gift. Mm-hmm. And I know in the guest blog that you did for us, you sort of made some recommendations around what would constitute a mid-size gift. If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you see a big range. I wrote some down because it does vary from size of shop. So like you'd see bigger shops considering a mid-level gift being somewhere between the $1,000 to $10,000 level. I've seen large hospitals go up as high as $100,000, which to me is not mid-level, but like really big shops getting really big gifts bump it up a bit higher. For smaller shops, I've found there's it depends. Again, there's no one size fits all, but a pretty consistent range I've seen at smaller shops is $250 to $999, with $1,000 sort of getting you into a bit more of a major gift territory. But depending on your organization, again, you could start your mid-level giving as low as $100. That's not outside of the realm of possibility. So some of it's about your capacity as a shop in terms of, what kind of resources you have and how much time you have, right? So that may be one piece that you need to consider in looking at what other shops are doing. What do you have the capacity to do in terms of, your time and your priorities, especially if you're wearing multiple hats. So one kind of handy thing I sometimes think about, just to reference, if you are a generalist and you're wearing a bunch of different hats, including fundraising, kind of understand what other organizations that are larger are doing, and you kind of scale it down as opposed to scaling up. And I'll give an example around major gifts. So major gifts at a bigger shop, typically if you had a staff person who is dedicated to doing major gifts, they would have like a caseload of about 150 donors and prospects going at one time. So if you're not working full-time on major gifts, let's say you estimate you're able to spend about 10% of your time on major gifts, you could scale that down and say, okay, I can probably manage about 15 major donors given the amount of time that I have. And that can kind of help you, sort of a quick and easy way to help you figure out how to segment your list to some degree. And Cindy, I know you've done a lot of work with your folks around figuring out who their major and mid-level donors are. Like, what is some of the advice that you have for folks in terms of deciding how to sort of tier those donors?
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of what we do is sort of, I don't want to say basic because it's not basic for small nonprofits, but if you've ever done sort of fundraising education or anything like that, they talk about recency, frequency, monetary. Mm-hmm. And honestly, that's pretty much what we do. So we have, and I have like free tools actually. If you guys haven't, I'm typing the link, signed up for our Operation Major Gifts, OMG. It's like a free mini course on major gifts. And one of the tools that's part of that is like a way to rank your donors for major or mid-sized gifts. Again, we really try to focus on information we have and we have access to, because I know that that's that's just a constraint, and we want to make it easy and time non-intensive. That's not a word. So we do very basic looking at people who've given close to or at those gift levels, whether it's major gifts or mid-sized gifts. When did they last give? How many times did they give? And you don't need a database or anything fancy to look at that. You just need a good spreadsheet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, and I think we've both touched upon this now. So without beating the point home, you don't need to go very far unless you literally have no donors. You don't need to go very far to find and deepen your relationships with your donors. The people in your universe usually have, usually there are some people who have the ability to give in a more significant way.
Absolutely. I always recommend that organizations start with those who have said yes first, right? Whether they've said yes to volunteering, they've said yes to coming to an event, they've said that they're attached to your organization in some way already. Those are going to be much warmer prospects for you than someone out there. I love your post that you talk about having to write a letter to Oprah. And I think we've all been there, where whether we have a board or an executive director or a leader who perceives the donors to be external to the organization, whereas as you said, unless your donation has absolutely no donors, no supporters, no community, the community is where you need to be starting first. I think that really makes sense. And I would say one last thing around that is sometimes like action's more important than information. Certainly don't just go willy-nilly into something without having a bit of a plan and a bit of a structure. But sometimes I find, myself included, we can really get held back by doing more research, doing more worry about how we're going to segment the donor base. Whereas like if you just decide on a very basic segmentation setup, and let's say you just decide, I'm going to go with the $250 to $999 and let's get moving on this mid-level program. You can fine tune things as you go, but don't get bogged down in trying to do more research
Totally love that advice. Everyone pay attention, because that is like golden, and you see that so often. It's like we always think we have imperfect information, and so we're always trying to get perfect information, whereas there is no such thing. Just work with what you have, get out the door, start engaging with people, and adjust, right? What's done is better than perfect. And there's another saying that I love: iterate your way to success. So speaking of doing, tell us a little bit about what actions go into a mid-sized giving strategy. What are the things that people need to be paying attention to on a day-to-day basis to move this forward?
Absolutely. So I think once you figured out who your mid-level donors are, it's figuring out what kind of tools or channels you're going to use to approach them. So why don't I talk about what some of the typical ones are, and some of the things that we need to think about in figuring out what combination of tools and channels you're using. I'd say first and foremost, at the heart of a lot of mid-level programs is really highly customized mail. So mail has typically been a very key part of good mid-level giving. If anyone tries to tell you that mail is dead, they don't know what they're talking about, because again, while one size doesn't fit all, donors are still giving through mail, and it's not only older donors, younger donors are still giving through mail as well. Can
I just pipe in? Because last month we had Ashley from Holland Bloorview, who's running a monthly giving program, who said the exact same thing. So she uses mail almost like as her best tool to convert one-time donors to monthly donors. So yes, exclamation point.
So that I think highly personalized is the key here. So highly personalized mail is at the heart of mid-level giving. One of the mistakes I've seen organizations make is that they may take their standard direct mail that they send to everybody, like their smaller donors, and they'll say, let's just repurpose the copy and we'll handwrite the address on the front. Really, your case and your messaging are actually going to look a little bit different when it comes to your mid-level folks. But I will actually just touch on the personalization piece a little bit first, because I found this is one of the places where smaller shops can really excel, because you see big shops struggle with personalizing mail because they're dealing with really high volumes, right? So if you're dealing with like 800, 1,000, 10,000 mid-level donors, you can't handwrite envelopes. So this is why I think small shops are particularly well positioned to be able to do this, because you can do it in your office, right? You can do it with volunteers. You can do it in front of the TV at night. I have spent many evenings in front of the TV in my career handwriting addresses for donors. So here's some of the things that you may see. Oh, we lost our host, hope all is well. Here's some of the things you typically see in very personalized mail for a mid-level donor. One thing to really make your mail stand out is to make sure you handwrite, as I've mentioned already, your donor's address. I'd say use that one sparingly. I've actually had organizations that have handwritten my address on a tax receipt. You don't need to handwrite the address on a tax receipt, because I'm going to open it because I want my tax receipt. So basically, think of it as a bit of a, bit of a unique and special thing that can personalize a piece of mail a little further and really prompt them to open that up. Another thing you might want to think about is size or color of envelope. Is like, how does it stand out amongst all the other sort of more generic mail that people are receiving? So, you can do a bit of personalization in terms of hand signing, for example, and I'll get to content in a bit. You can do a bit of personalization in terms of hand signing, personal notes from your executive director. When I worked with an organization that works with kids, we used to use really cute little shaped sticky notes, that was very appropriate to our brand. Anything that really makes it seem more like a personalized letter, personalized communication is great. One of the other advantages is that, if you're doing direct mail, hopefully you're already doing a bit of customization of the gift matrix, or like the options that people can check off to give. So 25, 75, 250. If you're doing this in-house, through really simple, word merge, you can really customize the gift matrix based on the last gift, which is really nice. So let's say they gave 250, you can customize the matrix to be 250, 500, 750, 1,000, with your goal kind of to move people up there if they can. So, and I would say typically with your mid-level folks, you want to make their last or you don't want to give them options that are lower than that mid-level. You want to give them a chance to,
don't start at $20.
Don't start at $20. You can certainly leave a spot for them, and I recommend you leaving a spot for them to write in a gift of whatever size they wish to give. But don't undersell yourself. It's a funny thing people seem to do, where it's like, if you've got someone giving $250, don't ask them for $20. If they want and need to give $20, they can write it in. So, that's a really nice, that opportunity for customization. Can
I ask a question? Because we haven't dealt with this yet in any of our master classes. Mm-hmm. So, and I love major gift fundraising, so I talk a lot about it and the relationships and doing asks in person. But I also know the reality for a lot of small shops is they might do a lot of that relationship building, but the ask still happens in the mail.
Yes.
And we don't talk about that a lot, but it's true. So how would the mid-size, other than like the gift range, which of course you should customize based on level, and you've said it should be a different letter than your broader appeal. How would you compare it to a major gift appeal?
That's a great question. I talk a bit about content later, so I can actually jump ahead to that, because your case, let's say your case for giving, is going to be a lot closer to a major gift case for giving, if that makes sense. And let me use an example of a mid-level package we did when I was working at the Shelter for Women and Kids. So our smaller donors would get a letter, say, before the holidays that was very focused on like making the holidays brighter for the women and kids at the shelter. It did really well. People were super responsive to it. It loaned itself really nice to the smaller levels. The mid-level package actually had a different case in it, and it was a case that was more aligned with the kind of case that we use with our major donors, and it was a little more. It was a little more complex. It was a little more sort of future looking. It was more oriented on, the future of women and how they could actually work to reach more women who are living in violence to help other women escape. So it was a little more complex. It had a little bigger and longer term impact, if that makes sense. So the cases just looked different in that sense. So, that said, it's what I have actually, and I can jump to it now if you want me to, or I can keep it till later. I have actually seen organizations effectively use symbolic giving, which I can also explain, because I know not everyone's going to know what symbolic giving means, or very specific, concrete, physical asks successfully in mid-level giving as well. It's just that it has to align with the amounts you're asking. Yeah. So if you want, I can.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I'm jumping all over the place, but
we love that.
Let me screen share here. Oh, awesome. Good. I open already.
Yeah. While you're doing that, so for everyone who's like sweating, like, oh my God, I have another level of donors that I need to engage, and do a whole other letter and blah, blah, blah. Like, it is much more closely aligned, as Emma said, with your major gifts. And you could probably, it's less work than it sounds, because I know the amount of work that everyone has is super overwhelming, and it's a lot, but this is worth it to do a special appeal around that. All right, so what are we looking at?
Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Excellent. So what we're looking at the website of the Redwood, which is a shelter here in West Toronto. And they have a symbolic giving program, which is basically, to explain simply, is a program that breaks down things that you can potentially purchase to support women and children at the organization. And so they've done what a lot of organizations have done around mid-level giving. So they've actually offer opportunities within the mid-level range. So you see here's a great example of what I'm talking about. If you see here in the bottom corner, there's a $900 option that actually helps support a woman go back to school to get training around. Actually, I clicked through because I love this. It's got like a woman doing like trades training. So the idea is that, like, it's a very specific ask. It's an ask that aligns itself well within the levels that you're looking at. And so it's concrete. So I would say these are a couple things to consider. It can be a concrete ask. I've got a sort of bigger, I've got an example of Plan doing something quite similar. They have a very, you'll be familiar with their symbolic giving program, because you'll have seen their ads about, the ones like World Vision and Plan, where you can buy a goat, for example. That's a good example of symbolic giving, something very concrete. So they've got, you'll see their, mid-level is a bit higher than a lot of people, but as you can see, you can do very concrete and specific things. This is not a must. I would say it's an option. So if you are already working within a framework like this, if you already ask for very distinct support for very distinct and concrete things, it's an opportunity for you to actually meld in your mid-level giving into your symbolic giving. But again, this doesn't have to be the case. The idea is, and I'll just come back now, stop share. Hello. The idea is that the case or what you're offering aligns with what you're asking for, right? So that it would be bigger, would be greater impact, that you're giving them a good reason to give $900 because they want to help a woman go back to school to learn a trade, or whatever the example may be. So that's a sort of concrete example of an idea that you can think about when you're thinking about content for your mid-level giving messaging.
Awesome.
I would say I actually would because having run a mid-level program sort of at a one-person shop, I would say, again, it is sort of about how you're investing your time and the value you're getting back for it. So for me, doing work on mid-level and major gifts was always a priority because I knew the return on investment was going to be much higher than a lot of the other different approaches. So knowing that you're going to raise, $25,000 through your mid-level mailing makes it a worthwhile investment to sit down and, maybe do some writing or even hire an external copywriter to support you. I often say, and actually this might be an appropriate time to say, it's so important if you're writing your direct mail copy internally that you have sought out the resources that you need to do it properly.
Yes.
I see a lot of, and I have always done my own direct mail copywriting, but it's taken a lot of professional development to be able to do that. And so it's something that I took quite seriously. And there's a lot of great low-cost ways to understand how to do it. But if you're going to do it internally, know that you just can't sit down and write whatever you feel like.
Yeah.
Because I say that only because I got a couple packages this week. I was like you spent all the time to mail it and prepare it and put it together.
Yeah.
Understand what's the anatomy of an effective direct mail package look like first.
Totally. There are books. I'm teaching a course at Humber, and the book we're using is, I can't remember.
Oh, hang on. I'm going to screen share again because I got another, I'm hopping all over the place because I got another good resource.
But it's not like people think that their writing has to be what they like. And that's not true. And there's a lot of research. I think it's Jeff Brooks, his book. There are like really clear, specific guides with great examples on how to write fundraising appeals. $20, maybe $30, and you just follow the book and you can become an expert. But most people certainly, as Emma said, don't start off that way. And we make consistent, large mistakes if you don't spend the time to learn it. So
I'm screen sharing here.
Oh, Mal Warwick, yeah.
So he this book basically trained me before I started doing mid-level giving. And it was actually so long ago. This is a new version because when I started doing this, there was no email or social media.
Yeah, no one gave online when we started. That was not a thing.
I know. Now I feel like I totally dated myself. But this is a quick read. It's available affordably online. It gives you a lot of very specific samples and examples of what effective mid-level mail looks like. And you can get so many ideas from this kind of thing. There's a variety, again, of different ways you can do it. One of the things we did one year was make our mid-level package look like a customized proposal, which was an idea I got from this book, and it worked really well. So there's a variety of different approaches you can take, and there's lots of really affordable resources. I would say buying this book probably was a return on investment of like 1,000,000 to 1. I don't know. It's probably exaggerating, but it's a really worthwhile. It's a quick read, great samples. I'll also show you another even online free resource, Agents of Good. If you're writing, direct mail that's for smaller donors, they have actually a direct mail 101 case study. And this literally walks you through with pictures of a pretend emergency appeal. That's set in the universe of Star Wars, which is quite funny. But they literally walk you through step by step saying, this is what you need to do. This is what should be on your envelope. This is what should not be on your envelope. But it's a great, really practical sort of study on the things that you need to be thinking about if you're writing your direct mail copy in-house. And again, this is for all direct mail, so mid-level actually might look a little different, but I just want to share that as a resource. That's at the Agents of Good website.
Can you copy the link into the chat?
I will do that now.
So obviously mail's a big part of your mid-level giving. What other aspects or components should you spend your time on?
Hang on, I'm just stopping sharing and pasting. I'm a bad multitasker. And sharing, yes. Okay, so mail, we covered off mail, which is definitely at the heart of great mid-level giving program. I'd say if I had to name something second, I'd say phone is a really important tool for you in your mid-level program. So I think, one thing that I've done to boost response after mail is, for example, put a PS in the mid-level giving letter, just letting people know that someone will be in touch in a couple of weeks to see if they had any questions about the program we were talking about. And I actually even have involved board members in helping do those follow-up calls if they've got really clear sort of scripts and talking points.
Yeah.
It's a great way to sort of share that around. And again, it doesn't actually have to be a big ask, because the ask already kind of came in the letter. So it really is more like, I'm on the board following up to see if you have any questions about the program that we wrote to you about a couple of weeks ago. And oftentimes the conversation would really just be around like, oh, thanks for the reminder. Like, people were literally like, I'm so glad you reminded me. I've gotten so busy. I've meant to send a gift and I didn't have the chance to do that. So it's a very sort of soft way to give people a bit of a nudge, and also an engagement device too with the phone. So phone's so important. I think increasingly, people are not capturing phone numbers as much as they used to, and it's become a little more difficult to reach people, but do really make every effort you can to capture phone numbers, because aside from actual solicitation, it's such a great way to also thank your donors as well. Such a personal way to thank your donors. So I'd say picking up the phone is really great, whether it's yourself, whether it's your board members, whether it's volunteers even. I've recruited volunteers to help with that if you've got someone who's close to the organization, and pretty good at that kind of relationship building. And of course, I think phone's really important on the stewardship side too, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But if you're asking for really big gifts, or much bigger gifts, then, as I said, I think in my post, $500 is a lot of money. It's a lot of money for all of us. So, if you're getting a $500 gift, you're getting a $250 gift, is like, how are you thanking them? How are you taking care of them afterwards? And it's got to look, again, a little bit more sort of warm and personal perhaps than, well, all your stewardship should be warm and personal, but you may have to go a little further, for example, with your mid-level folks, just because it is a gift that's, that much bigger, say, than their previous gift. So I would say phone, an important part of a mid-level program, important part of all of our fundraising programs, but it can definitely be used just as a sort of follow-up device, as a reminder, as a nudge, and it doesn't have to be you if you're really overloaded. It can be definitely recruiting other folks, such as your board, as long as you're supporting them well around having speaking points. That can be, it can be a great way for your board members to participate in fundraising. So I'd say phone is in there. I said I'd talk a bit about digital later.
Yeah.
So yes, did you have any other questions for me before I talked about digital? I don't have a ton to say about digital, but.
No, I was going to say, I think you made the point that is really important with all fundraising, which is people have good intentions that sometimes don't always get acted upon because life is life and it's busy. And so I love those follow-up calls because it's such a gentle, polite nudge. It's like, it's not pushy or anything like that. I think, especially with these, and I want to talk a little bit about where you're finding mid-level donors, specifically, we kind of touched upon it at the beginning, but more explicitly, but these are people who've probably given to you in the past. I think most of them have every intention of continuing support, especially if you steward them well. It's just stuff happens, and that mail I have my AFP renewal sitting on my desk, and then I put it into my folder to come with me to the office, and then I unpack my folder and it sits on my desk, and again and again. And it's not that people don't want to, like, I have every intention of renewing. It's not on the top of my to-do list at this moment. So those calls are really not actually very invasive, but very powerful.
Yeah.
So,
and sometimes, deeper and interesting conversations come out of that, that can move the relationship forward even further. So having that opportunity to engage one-on-one. And I'd love to tell a brief story before I start talking about digital.
Totally.
And that is, and I think it kind of illustrates the importance of both starting with those who are already giving to you, and not making any assumptions about people's ability to give based on their current giving level. So I'll tell a story about a donor that I met in the past that was giving a very small gift of about $75 a year to an organization I worked with. It was through direct mail, and she'd been given for about 10 years. And we actually had the occasion to have a donor events that she came to. So again, a great way, if you can find ways to get your donors out to meet you in person, that's always wonderful. She came to a donor event, and she just mentioned very casually in passing that she was interested in including a gift to our organization in her will. So of course I made note of that, always important, because sometimes people hear it and don't follow up. So I made note of that, and I followed up, and I called her to come back in for a meeting with our executive director, and we had a great meeting with her, and we talked about, arranging the gift in her will. And, over the course of a few months, we developed a nice relationship with her, just sort of understanding what was important about her, what was important to her about giving to the organization, and what was motivating her to have made this decision. And she decided that she wanted to actually see the gift in action during her lifetime. And so she made a gift of $250,000. So
whoa.
I just want to, this is a absolutely true story. These are donors who are in your donor base already. This is a donor who herself said to me, I give to 10 other organizations like you, and no one kind of ever bothers with me. So pay attention to your small donors, definitely. Even $75 is not small, right? $75 is something that needs to be appreciated and attended to. And if you do, you can often discover, when I talk about the sort of usual suspects in major giving, is that people are looking at whose name's on a hospital, but there are folks out there who, don't advertise or demonstrate necessarily in traditional ways that they have significant capacity to give. So, and they may be hiding in your donor base. And definitely a mid-level program is a great way to sort of start engaging with folks and having those conversations. So you can find those people who are giving $75, but they could actually be giving $250,000.
Yeah. Great story. I love that, because most of the major donors I've worked with in the past are like on no one's radar, or they might be a little bit, but like there's certainly a name that you can't, recall if you think about a philanthropist. Mm-hmm. So let's say we define.
I was going to talk about digital. Should I do that?
Okay.
Another question.
Let's come back to digital.
We'll come back to digital.
Okay, because I have a question. That I think ties into. Well, anyways, I'll ask it. You can pick which one you want to start with. So obviously, like there are people who might get your annual appeal, or however semi-annual, whatever, how often you send that out, who will say like, write you a check in response to that for $500, and you might move them into a mid-level donor. Yeah. But and that's great, because there are people who will do that. But do you have specific strategies to upgrade your broader base donors to that level, or would you recommend, I guess? Mm-hmm. Or is it kind of just like people are sitting on some of that, they just don't take advantage of it?
I think there's a couple things you can do, and this actually is a great place to talk about pipeline building for major guests. So I'd say a couple things that I've seen work well around upgrading is putting a giving club in place. So you've all seen that, different sort of levels of giving that motivate people to increase their gifts. It doesn't work in every context, but surprisingly can continue to work with folks. Sometimes it's been around for ages, but depending upon the nature of your organization, you may be able to provide sort of particular perks, particular access to people that people want to access. So that's almost its own, like, starting a giving club is almost its own workshop. But the idea being that, there are different levels of giving that people can upgrade to that have sort of different acknowledgements, different perks, different things sort of attached to them. I think the other piece is around your case. That's a great way to upgrade folks, is like, you want to present something to someone that is really tempting to support. Do you know what I mean? It's like, if I was thinking about giving a $250 gift, But I saw that if I gave a $900 gift, I could send a woman at the shelter to support her in going back to a trade school. And that's really important to me. That's, I think, a great way to sort of upgrade folks. And I would say finally, you know, that it's, when we talk about pipeline, for example, this is the, you know, getting people into giving a bigger gift is really like figuring out who your top tier of folks in mid-level is and seeing if you can qualify them to become major donors. And to break that down, to super simplify that, I would say for a small shop, if you are able to get a donor that's sort of, you know, giving in the top tier around $1,000 to come meet with you face to face and to actually develop a relationship with you that's more sort of one-on-one and personal, that's kind of, I would say that's a big qualifier if you're thinking about qualifying folks for your major gift pipeline. That's sort of number one, right? Like even if you have someone giving $5,000, if they don't want to come and meet with you face to face, they don't necessarily need to go into your major gift pool. They might like giving by mail, right? They might like giving online. That's hard for some people to struggle with. So you can't make assumptions about it. But you know, you do want to give people that opportunity to get out face to face and see you. And those people who are interested in engaging one-on-one, those are your major donors and your major donor prospects, right? Those who are not interested in engaging one-on-one with you, they may be giving at the major gift level, but you may actually be soliciting them still through your mid-level program because that's what they want, right?
Totally.
I think that's really key there is like, what does your donor want? Do they want a personal relationship with you? They might not actually, right? In major gifts, I find we often assume that they do, but they don't necessarily. So it's like being flexible in that way to say, you know, for those that I can move up to mid-level to understand more about what's motivating them to give, to understand what they like to give to really customize that offer to them more to say, oh, well, this is perfect for you. You know, you fit really nicely with this program. Yeah. Like, so yeah, so I'd say that those are some things to consider in a bit of a nutshell. Yeah. But I'd say your ultimate goal, you know, at the end of the day is to sort of see if you can qualify folks from that mid-level pool up into your major gift. And again, like this is getting into sort of more sophisticated strategy that's people are thinking about as a larger shop strategy, but can be easily replicated on a smaller scale. And often more easily replicated on a smaller scale than in big shops. Because I'll tell you, you know, one of the big challenges in big shops is there's often so much siloing. So you've got like your mid-level program lives in your annual giving program. You've got your major gift program living with major gifts. And there's not necessarily an easy flow of gifts between those two. So we're not doing, I'm not talking from personal experience or anything, but it is known that oftentimes what happens is we're not making the decision that's best for the donor. We're making the decision around, you know, like where's the most convenient place for mid-level giving to live?
What are my metrics?
What are my metrics? Like
as a fundraiser,
I can't give up this $10,000 donor because it's going to bump my, you know, my goal down too much. So
that's why we work with small nonprofits and everyone here, because you don't deal with that.
It's a definite advantage. It's another small shop advantage when it comes to mid-level is that you don't need to navigate that because it's a real barrier for sure in bigger shops.
Yeah.
So let me talk about digital.
Yeah. And then I want to go to questions because we don't have that much longer.
I know it's so much content to cover. I've got like 3 pages of notes here. Okay, so I want to talk about digital, and I'm not going to get into tons of digital, but I do want to say digital is an important part of your mid-level giving program too. So don't be afraid of having your mid-level donors in your email list. Just make sure that you're communicating appropriately with them. So the same, you know, and digital is bigger than email, obviously, but email is sort of one of the things that a lot of smaller shops have in hand or are planning to have in hand. So, you know, ensure that you're following some of the same practices in your digital when you're working with your mid-level donors. So you do want to have them segmented out so that you can communicate with them in a consistent manner. And you definitely want to, there's a lot of big words we throw around in fundraising, like integrated multi-channel fundraising. And basically, like for a smaller shop, that means, let's say you have a mid-level donor, you're communicating with them consistently over all of your channels about the same thing. Does that make sense? Doesn't have to be complicated, but I'll give you an example from my personal experience of donating to a lot of organizations. What I often see happening as a monthly donor is that I'll get one solicitation in the mail, I'll get one solicitation by email, and there'll be a third campaign going on social media. So you're sending me mixed messages, right? It's like your ask is different in mail, your ask is different in email, and your ask is different in social media. For people are making the mistake of creating campaigns that are specific to channels, as opposed to creating a campaign that's specific to donors that is then integrated across those channels. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. I don't know. What do you guys think? And I want to be clear, this doesn't have to be overly complicated or work intensive. So instead of maybe you don't have these different messages for all these channels, how do you take a consistent message and sort of tool it one way for your lower level donors, but maybe it's consistent but slightly altered for your mid-level and major gift donors, so that I don't want you guys writing 10 million letters and then 10 million different social media posts and blah, blah, blah. We know, Emma and I know that that's totally unrealistic, but don't make the mistake of having all these different messages. Pick one that you can tweak or alter in meaningful ways for donors at different stages of their giving to your organization, and leverage that instead of trying to do a bazillion things.
Because I see organizations putting the work and the time in, but then creating a mail campaign, an email campaign, and a social media campaign that all look different. So it's you could take the same time and you could probably take less time, because let's say you have sort of two main streams of messaging or slightly tweaked messaging, right? Let's say you're writing a mid-level letter, you decide to make that move. You're taking messages out of the mid-level letter for your email campaign to your mid-level donors. And you're just actually being more consistent in the messaging, as opposed to creating a separate campaign, which I see small shops do often, for each channel, as opposed to thinking about the communication across channels with a donor. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Are people comfortable with the idea of segmentation? Do you feel like you can segment your donors? Just take a second in the chat and let us know. Is that something that feels okay, I can do that? Or oh my God, should we spend a minute just walking you through step by step? Because none of this is going to be all useful for you if you don't have that capacity. And it's not, it's not super hard, but just let us know in the chat if we need, we can wrap on that, or we can go straight to questions. But I want to make sure you can use this, and I understand that could be a barrier for organizations. So
I actually have a post on that I'm going to share with folks too.
Sweet.
It's called Simple Segmentation Strategies for Your Small Shop.
Yeah.
So let me do that. Sorry, I'm hang on. Now I have to find you. Where did you go? There you are.
Great. So let's talk about this. I'm opening up while we're doing it.
Yeah. Maureen had a question about segmentation.
Yeah. What tool do you use for your website? Taking time to learn how to do that. Hey, Sarah. All right. Emma, why don't you talk a little bit about your post and
yes. So you can get into more detail in the post, but as Cindy said, she talked a little bit earlier about recency, frequency, and value. So the post delves a bit more into those ideas, but basically, you don't have to get some bigger shops get really complicated. They turn their nose up at segmenting by recency, frequency, and value. I think it's a great starting point. And again, it's probably almost its own masterclass, but it's basically as you're segmenting your donors based on how often they give to you, how much they give to you, and how recently they gave to you. Does that make sense? So how recently they gave to you, how often they give to you, and how much they give to you. And that post delves into it a little bit more, but some of your typical segments, for example, your mid-level donors is a segment, and you've segmented them out by saying, I want all of my donors giving $250 to $999 to be my mid-level segment. Your monthly donors can be a segment.
So that's just an amount, like you guys in a simple spreadsheet, sort by amount, take anyone who's given in that level and move them over into a tab that's mid-level donors. Anyone who gives 1,000 or more, move those people over. Like in a spreadsheet, if you have a database, fantastic. But yeah, so those ones are just by amount. That's the easy one. Monthly donors should be fairly straightforward. Like if you don't have a report that can tell you your monthly donors, if you sort by donor name, you're gonna get a clear picture of like the people who are giving to you multiple times, who make a gift or transaction multiple times a year. You can either assume those are monthly donors or people who are actively involved in giving. I would say that's a good indicator of interest. Okay, so that's monthly giving or regular donors.
Yeah. Like I would say if I thought back on my very smallest shop, segments that I found very important were monthly donors. So those are donors that are, of great value to you over the course of their lifetime. So you may interact with them differently. Ultimately, segmentation is just like, how are you interacting with, engaging with, and relating with your donors? That's your ultimate goal when you're segmenting. So, I want to work differently with my monthly donors. I want to work differently with my donors who are giving $250 to $999. And I want to work differently with my donors who are giving like 1,000 and up. You can get bonus points for things like, I want to know who's been giving to my organization for 10 years, and I want to be acknowledging that. So there are many layers to it, depending upon how much you have, like in terms of resources. It doesn't have to be difficult to do, as you pointed out. It can be simply, sorting stuff out. If you don't have a database, it can be simply sorting names and amounts and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Which is what we do when we work with clients. We get their 5-year donor data, which is almost always in a spreadsheet, just because the nature of the clients we work with. And that's all we do. Like it's not, it's not rocket science, and it doesn't have to be. If you have a sophisticated database or any database, these should be built-in reports. But if you're just using Excel, just sort by amount, sort by name, and look for patterns that way. And you can see, like, if someone made 2 donations of $1,000, like one 5 years ago, one 3 years ago, great major gift prospect, or mid-level prospect, you want to start there. So there's no magic, right? A lot of people, I think, in my experience, when we start talking about this, they think that there's like some secret formula that we have when it comes to donor segmentation, but it's really straightforward, or at least it can be really straightforward. You can certainly have very complex reporting and stuff like that to identify all these different things. But if you are like most of our clients who are working with very minimal resources, you can still segment. And we're getting a couple questions. So Anne asked, is there evidence to show that this works better than just a general blanket message, and the donors can interpret on their own how much they can donate?
I would say absolutely, based on, when organizations measure things like response rate and average gift, you'll always see those being depressed. If you're just sending out if you send everybody a general message, you're not going to raise as much money. Basically, is what the evidence shows, is that if you can help people, again, I always say, always give people the opportunity to make their own decision on how much to give by including a blank space with a dollar sign next to it if you're doing mail, for example. Yeah. But like giving people ideas of amounts to give is important, right? Yeah. Because it helps sort of set sights for folks. Again, it doesn't have to be huge. It can be based on, for example, you know, if you have past data, it can be based on average giving. So I'm not saying that you should randomly send out a mid-level package to everybody, right? That's not necessarily appropriate because, you know, you don't want to be asking someone for $1,000 if they give $25 currently, but you do want to be looking at people's giving histories and ensuring that you're customizing what you're asking for appropriately. Otherwise, you're simply not going to raise as much money. That's what it comes down to.
So in terms of research, there is a lot of research being done in our sector right now around this kind of thing. I'm certainly not one of them. And I would say both Em and I are more practitioners, but Tom Ahern and Simone Joya are both pretty big in the research space and testing. So, and then the other reference I would make is around behavioral economics. So that's sort of a new-ish, it's not that new anymore, but basically it looks at, and it tests and looks at how people make decisions and how you can create an environment to nudge people to make the decision that you want them to make. So for example, I think most well-known studies, if you give people 3 sizes of coffee, they're going to pick the middle size. That's how people make decisions. And it doesn't matter how many ounces. It could be like 2, 4, and 6, or 12, 10, or 12, 14, 16, or 8, 10, 12. It doesn't matter. People are hardwired, for the most part, to choose the middle. They don't want to, like, there's a lot of psychology around it. I'm not an expert, I don't know. But there is certainly a lot of research around behavioral economics and around how people make decisions. And that also plays into it. So giving people choices, that show you know them, or you kind of like acknowledge their past relationship with your organization, is important. People want to feel recognized, but also understanding the psychology behind people's choices. So there's fundraising research, and then there's broader behavioral economic research that if you're like super interested in reading some of that, my guess is Tom Ahern is probably the best place to start around that, but I don't know if you have any other recommendations.
Yeah. Nothing, I'm just noticing we're running out of time. So there's one.
Oh my God. Yeah. The other question Maggie had is, does it make a difference if the $1,000 donors are board members? Is there a different strategy with them?
Yes, I would say absolutely, because they're so close to your organization. So, you know, my question would be, who's the appropriate person to thank them and engage with them? And that may be your board chair with your support, and maybe your executive director, but I would say they're that close, they're very close to you, right? I would say that would be more of a highly personalized interaction. And they may say like, oh, actually, no, I'm perfectly happy continuing to give by mail. Or, you know, the conversation could take another direction. So I would say if they're a board member giving in that range, they're a board member giving in any range, it should be a more personalized ask. So I think for me, and I'd say I'd hazard a guess for Cindy too, that having 100% of your board giving a gift that is personally significant to them is an important part of your fundraising strategy. And so when I say personally significant to them, having worked at a women's shelter that has former residents of the shelter on the board, it was very much on a case-by-case basis as to how much they were able to give that was personally significant. We had a former resident of the board who was giving monthly. It was a significant commitment to her. She was able to do it within her budget, and it was great because, you know, having the board on board with giving and also demonstrating their commitment to philanthropy was really great. And also having her being able to talk about her personal giving to the organization was great too. So I'd say those conversations do need to be more personal.
Yeah.
I'd say, oh gosh, so I'd give, get, or get out. I'm like, I'm not a give, get, or get out gal. I like that. That's kind of a nice, for some.
Gal, yeah.
Yeah, and that's true. Sorry, I'm just reading these because I know
Yeah.
for some arts organization, it's mandatory for a board member to contribute a major gift. That's not only arts organizations. I've seen that at a hospital too.
Yeah.
That's a values piece for an organization. You know, I think it depends on what you do and what the mission is of your organization. Having worked with organizations that work with a lot of community-based boards, that's not appropriate, right? Because our community-based boards cannot have the capacity to give a major gift. So that's a bigger conversation for your organization to have, that's really around, you know, that's around values and who's on your board, who needs to be on your board. Right? So I won't say it's inappropriate, but it's definitely not appropriate for all boards depending upon the organization and the mission. What is appropriate is 100% board giving at a personally significant level. That's the language I like to use, because personally significant could be $5, right? Depending upon what your budget is and where you are in life. It's just is about, you know, making a gift that's meaningful to you, depending upon where you are in your life circumstances. So it is a thing for sure, Anne, and I would say it very much depends on the organization. And for someone who works with small shops, it's not something I personally typically recommend.
Yeah.
The give, get, or get out piece.
So we have a couple more minutes for questions, and while we wait, if you want to type them in to the chat, I will just sort of formally wrap up and say you can join us next month. I have my colleague Anya McGlynn, who we're going to be talking about fundraising habits. Both of us are kind of habit junkies in that we believe that you can sort of build efficiency and routine into some habits, and around fundraising, that becomes really important to your success. It's not just important to do something, it's important to do it consistently. And so we'll be talking about that next month. You'll get emails about that. And I often get questions about about the Good Partnership, because a lot of people, this is their first time joining. So we help small nonprofits with their fundraising so they can focus on changing the world. So we work exclusively with small nonprofits. Most of them don't have a fundraiser in-house. And we help take that off the plate of usually the executive director, who is overwhelmed and drowning. So we have a whole range of services, but if you want to learn more, you can visit our site, or I'm sure you'll get more information about us with our blogs and other emails. So yeah, if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to me personally. But we have a couple more minutes. I have a couple more minutes, maybe 3 more minutes. Yeah, overwhelmed and drowning. Sarah, I'm laughing because I literally have a response like, I need to draft you today. So you'll get something, but we'll book a time to chat. So my business is The Good Partnership. We're a small team right now of 3 people. And yeah, you'll get our emails. If you are registered for today, you'll get a blog Monday next week. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed our time together. You guys had great questions. Yeah, so do just like, even if you can only implement one idea that you got here today, it's a move forward. So even if you're overwhelmed and wearing a lot of hats, it's just little by little that you can move forward with fundraising. So don't feel overwhelmed. Just, do as much as you can and try and prioritize. And yeah, we're here for you. We feel you.
Totally. Yes. Sorry. Someone actually, someone asked.
While you talk, I had one more resource I want to share for folks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone asked if there's a replay available. So I don't usually share it widely, but if you do want a copy of today's session, just email me at Cindy at partnership.com, and I will send you the link, but it's not widely available. So,
okay, I'm just showing my screen so you can see with a lot more specific information around mid-level giving called the missing middle. And it is geared towards larger shops, but I'd say it's a quick and easy read, and it also gives you some case studies that show you what levels different organizations are starting their mid-level giving at, and talks about some of the results that they got. So it's really a useful read if you want to deepen your understanding of mid-level and what some of the issues are, and just sort of see what some of the great things to change are. And I'm just scrolling through to the end, so I'll cut and paste that in the, but it's great because you actually see these case studies where it talks about what kind of money they're raising, what kind of results they're getting. And again, don't be overwhelmed when you see that they're raising $53 million. These are all these are all ideas and practices that you can still implement in your small shop. In fact, as I said, more easily often than the bigger shops. So I'm just cutting and pasting that into our, sorry, hang on.
Awesome. While you do that, so the question was asked about tools for the website. Do you want to clarify what you mean?
Yes, I'm not sure I understand what that means.
Yeah. I know we talked a little bit at the beginning about a web tool, which is, so like I think it was a crowdfunding tool. I'm not familiar with that particular one, if that's what you're asking about.
Yes. So why don't I address that one? Because that was when I was talking about digital, I would say that is what a crowdfunding tool is. Yeah. So I would say that, again, what we had said about thinking about this, like in terms of your donors and your supporter community, before you decide on your tool, I think crowdfunding can loan itself nicely to some very specific situations. And that is typically when you are trying to raise money for something that is quite sort of time sensitive, but also may have some particular like perks attached to it at different levels. So crowdfunding is not for everything, I would say. I would say first and foremost, if you've got, if you've got a community of supporters, like if you have access to their email, it may be more appropriate for you to start with an email campaign as opposed to going straight to a crowdfunding campaign. Yeah. So I'd say it's hard to know without knowing more about your specific situation, which you're going to run out of time today. But I would say deciding, like understanding more the community you're raising funds for and the case you're using to raising funds may then lead you to the appropriate tool, which may or may not be a crowdfunding tool. Yeah. I find I get asked about crowdfunding most frequently, and it's one of the least, I'm not down on crowdfunding, but it's often one of the last things we end up doing with organizations. Again, one size does not fit all, but typically it's not one of the first things I recommend with organizations.
If you email me, I actually have a recording of a previous masterclass we did with a different crowdfunding platform. Regardless of the platform, the learning and the discussion, I think, would be really informative. I don't personally endorse any specific crowdfunding platform, and I would echo Emma's comments. I think don't look for magic solutions in the platform. Focus on simple ways to engage your donors that you can implement and follow through with. And based on what those strategies are, figure out the tools to help you. But often, especially in small organizations, you really don't need fancy tools. Mm-hmm. You really don't. Unless you have I'll leave it at that. All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
It's been fun.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.